Daniel didn't think twice when he handed a struggling woman a few dollars for the bus. To him, it was just a kind gesture. But what he didn't know? She was a millionaire CEO in disguise, and what happened next would change both of their lives forever. The cold wind bit at Daniel's skin as he walked toward the bus stop, pulling his worn-out jacket tighter around his shoulders. It was just another long day. His shift at the auto repair shop had drained him, his hands still greasy from fixing engines. But he didn't mind. Hard work never scared him. As he approached the bus stop, he noticed a woman sitting alone on the bench. She was shivering, rubbing her arms to keep warm. Her clothes were simple. Jeans, a hoodie, sneakers, nothing flashy. But there was something about her. Something different. She looked out of place, not because she didn't belong, but because she carried herself like she did. Daniel hesitated. Then, as he got closer, he saw the way she nervously patted her pockets, searching for something. Her bus fare. His chest tightened. She didn't have it. He had been there before, too many times, choosing between food and transportation, wondering how to stretch a few dollars just to make it to the next payday. Without a second thought, Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out a few crumpled bills, and handed them to her. "Here," he said, "for the bus." The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes met his, and for a second, time stood still. They were the most captivating eyes he had ever seen, deep brown, filled with something he couldn't quite place. She blinked. You don't have to do that." Daniel shrugged, giving her a small smile. "It's cold. You need to get home." For a moment, she just stared at him, as if no one had ever done something like this for her before. Then, slowly, she reached out and took the money. "Thank you." Daniel nodded. "No problem." The bus pulled up and she stepped onto it, but just before the doors closed, she turned back, as if she wanted to say something else. But then, just like that, she was gone. Daniel didn't know her name, didn't know her story. But what he didn't realize? This wasn't the last time he'd see her. And when he did, his entire world would change. The next morning, Daniel pushed through the doors of Harper Industries' auto division, the biggest corporate client his small repair shop worked with. His boss had sent him to handle a high-priority job. Some CEO was coming for a private tour, and everything had to be perfect. Daniel didn't care much about rich executives. They sat in glass offices while people like him did the real work. As he walked through the industrial garage, the usual mechanics were scrambling around, making last-minute fixes. There was tension in the air. Higher-ups were coming. A tall man in a sharp suit clapped his hands. "All right, listen up. The CEO will be here any minute. If she asks you something, answer quickly and respectfully. She's one of the most powerful women in the industry. Don't waste her time." Daniel sighed. Another out-of-touch millionaire who had never held a wrench in her life. He grabbed his toolbox and made his way to one of the high-end sports cars parked in the lot. It was a beauty, sleek, powerful, worth more than he'd make in a lifetime. As he leaned over to check the engine, he heard footsteps approaching. Then, a voice. A familiar voice. "Is this the new model?" Daniel froze. He knew that voice. He turned around. And there she was, the woman from the bus stop. But she wasn't in jeans and sneakers now. She was in a tailored suit, heels clicking against the floor like they owned the place. Employees hovered around her, hanging onto her every word. Daniel's breath caught. She wasn't just some random woman struggling for bus fare. She was the CEO, his boss's boss's boss. His heart pounded as she scanned the garage, nodding at different reports. And then her eyes landed on him. For a moment, she looked at him like she was trying to place his face. Then, realization dawned. Her lips parted slightly, shock flickering across her face. Daniel held her gaze, feeling something shift in the air between them. She remembered him. But instead of saying anything, she gave him a small, knowing smile, a secret just between them. And in that moment, Daniel knew. This woman, the one he had helped without thinking twice, was about to turn his life upside down. Daniel's pulse pounded as the realization sank in. The woman he had given bus fare to wasn't just anyone. She was the CEO of Harper Industries, his boss's boss, the most powerful person in the room, and she was looking directly at him. For a split second, Daniel swore he saw amusement flicker in her eyes, like she was enjoying the fact that he was the one caught off guard now. Then she spoke. "You," she said, tilting her head. "What's your name?" Daniel swallowed, forcing himself to stay composed. "Daniel Carter, ma'am." Her lips twitched slightly. "Daniel." She said his name slowly, like she was testing how it felt. Then she crossed her arms. "You work here?" Daniel nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm one of the lead mechanics for your fleet division." She raised an eyebrow. Impressive. He didn't know how to respond to that. The CEO of a billion-dollar company was standing in front of him, acting as if his job actually mattered. The suited executive from earlier stepped in quickly, clearing his throat. "Ms. Harper, Daniel is one of our best. He's been with the company for years." Daniel barely heard him. "Ms. Harper." "Harper, of course. Olivia Harper, one of the youngest self-made CEOs in the industry. The woman who had taken over her late father's company and expanded it into an empire. A woman who was always in the headlines for her brilliance, her business deals, and her complete lack of a personal life. She didn't belong on a cold street, counting coins for a bus ride. So why had she been there? Daniel had questions, but he kept his mouth shut. She was his boss, that's all that mattered. Until she smirked. "Daniel," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the hood of the car beside them. "Why don't you walk me through this model? I'd like to hear about it from someone who actually works with these engines, not just someone who signs reports." The other executive stiffened. Daniel blinked. Was she serious? No CEO had ever cared about a mechanic's opinion before. They cared about profits, not people. And yet, here she was, waiting, a challenge in her eyes. Daniel took a slow breath. Fine. If she wanted an answer, he'd give her one. He placed his hand on the engine, looking her directly in the eyes. "All right, Ms. Harper, let me tell you what your engineers got right and what they completely messed up." A few executives gasped. "Olivia?" She just grinned. A stunned silence filled the showroom. Daniel's words had landed like a brick through a glass window. No one spoke to the CEO of Harper Industries like that. The executives standing around them shifted uncomfortably, their polished shoes squeaking against the tiled floor. But Olivia? She just smiled. "Go on then," she said, arms crossed. "Tell me what we got wrong." Daniel met her gaze, his confidence growing. If she was going to ask, then she was going to get the truth. He ran his hand over the engine, nodding toward a specific section. "Your engineers focused too much on horsepower and speed, but they ignored heat dissipation. This model overheats faster than it should." A few executives exchanged nervous glances. One of them muttered, "We already ran tests." Daniel cut him off, looking straight at Olivia. "Sure, tests in controlled conditions. Try running this on the street in heavy traffic on a hot day, and I guarantee the engine will struggle." Olivia's lips twitched, but she didn't interrupt. Daniel continued. "And then there's the transmission system. It's smooth, but you didn't reinforce it enough for long-term use. You want a luxury experience, but if a customer pushes this car to its limits, that transmission is going to fail. A tense silence followed. Daniel straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. Bottom line? It's a great car, but if you want it to be perfect, it still needs work. Everyone waited for Olivia's reaction. Would she be furious? Would she have him fired on the spot? Instead, she did something that shocked the entire room. She laughed, a genuine, amused, pleased laugh. Daniel blinked. What the hell? One of the executives, still nervous, tried to step in. Ms. Harper, I assure you our engineers can… Olivia held up a hand. Relax, Mark. She turned back to Daniel, her smile lingering. You're right. Daniel frowned. I am? She nodded. You think I don't know about the overheating issue? I do. I just wanted to see if anyone in my company had the guts to tell me to my face. The executives paled. Daniel crossed his arms. And the transmission? Olivia smirked. That? You just saved us months of troubleshooting. Our test drivers didn't even catch that flaw yet. More stunned silence. Olivia tilted her head. How long have you been with Harper Industries? Daniel hesitated. 6 years. She raised an eyebrow. And no one ever promoted you? Daniel gave a dry chuckle. You tell me. Something flashed in her eyes. She turned to her executives. Someone tell me why the best mechanic in this company has been stuck in the same position for 6 years. No one answered. Olivia exhaled sharply, then turned back to Daniel. Meet me in my office tomorrow morning. We're fixing that. Daniel blinked. Wait, what? Olivia smiled. Congratulations. You just earned yourself a promotion. The entire room erupted in whispers. Daniel? Promoted? Just like that? Daniel himself was too stunned to react, but as Olivia turned to leave, she glanced over her shoulder, giving him one last knowing look. By the way, she said quietly, so only he could hear, I never needed the bus fare, but I'm glad you gave it to me. And just like that, she walked out, leaving Daniel standing there, his world turned completely upside down. Daniel sat outside Harper Industries headquarters, gripping a fresh cup of coffee, his mind still reeling. Yesterday, he was just a mechanic. A nobody. Today, he was sitting in front of the tallest building in the city, about to walk into a meeting with a CEO who had personally promoted him. What the hell was happening? He hadn't slept much. After the showroom incident, his co-workers had bombarded him with questions. Some were jealous, some were impressed, and some thought he was crazy for speaking so bluntly to Olivia Harper. Daniel still wasn't sure how he had pulled it off, but one thing kept nagging at him. Olivia's last words. I never needed the bus fare. But I'm glad you gave it to me. What did that mean? Had she been testing him? Was it all some kind of social experiment? And why did he care so much? He ran a hand through his hair and let out a breath. It didn't matter. All that mattered was walking into that office and not screwing up. With that thought, he stood up, squared his shoulders, and walked through the glass doors. Inside, the receptionist smiled warmly. Mr. Carter, Ms. Harper is expecting you. Take the elevator to the top floor. The top floor, Daniel exhaled. No turning back now. A few minutes later, he stood outside Olivia Harper's office, his hands shoved into his pockets, his heartbeat steady. But his mind racing before he could knock, her voice called out, Come in, Daniel. He pushed the door open. Olivia sat behind a sleek glass desk, reviewing a document. Today, she wasn't in the showroom, playing the role of an anonymous customer. She was in full CEO mode, powerful, confident, effortlessly in control. And yet, when she looked up at him, there was something else in her eyes, something he hadn't seen before. She gestured to the seat across from her. Sit. Daniel did. She leaned forward. Do you know why I called you here? Daniel crossed his arms. To offer me a promotion. Olivia smirked. Yes, but that's not the only reason. She slid a file across the table. Open it. Daniel frowned, but obeyed. Inside were documents, his employment records, project reports, and something else. A letter, his resignation letter. Daniel stiffened. What the hell is this? Olivia watched him carefully. 3 months ago, you submitted your resignation. You were planning to leave, weren't you? Daniel clenched his jaw. She did her homework. Yeah, he admitted. I was tired of being overlooked. Tired of working my ass off while people like Nick got promoted just for being corporate lapdogs. Olivia nodded. And yet, you stayed. Daniel looked away. Didn't have a choice. I needed the paycheck. She studied him for a moment. Then, softly, she said, You do now. Daniel's breath hitched. She slid another document toward him. A new contract, higher salary, a senior position, a real opportunity. But Daniel barely looked at it. He was too focused on her. Why are you doing this? He asked. Why me? Olivia leaned back, tapping her fingers against the desk. Because I know talent when I see it. Because you speak the truth when others won't, and... She hesitated. Then, with a small smile, she said, Because I trust you. Daniel's chest tightened. She wasn't just offering him a job. She was offering him something more. A chance. A new beginning. And, deep down, something else neither of them was ready to admit. He exhaled sharply, then reached for the pen. All right, boss, he said with a smirk. Let's do this. Olivia grinned. Good choice, Carter. And just like that, Daniel's life changed forever.